chance this still... I feel sorry for it. This is a story, it's not right from the beginning, so I'll explain a little bit. It's a story about a man who's the last man living in the top of a tower block that's doomed for destruction, and everyone else has moved out. In her bedroom, he packed away his mother's belongings with an energy he thought had been lost. He slotted audiobooks, photographs, crosswords, pyjamas, socks and spectacles side by side into boxes, her meticulous categorisation no longer necessary. He forced himself to hold each item no more than a couple of seconds to avoid the dangerous sadness that threatened. At around 4, Jed switched on a pink-shaded lamp and sat on her bed. He noticed the white stem of the lamp was dirty around the switch. He rubbed his neck and stared at the lamp for a moment, thinking about his mother's hands. Tomorrow he'd move on to the kitchen. He picked up parcel tape to seal the boxes and stopped. A high whine was coming from the front door. He listened, his head turned in the direction of the sound. It was the wind finding its way around the edges of the door. At its strongest, it hit a fluctuating high E, and he registered the note absently, the way most people would notice the colour of a balloon. His music training may not have led to a career, but it left him with another sense, perfect pitch. It was a superpower that, for the most part, was utterly useless. The door hummed its E note, then climbed to an F sharp. Jed stood and walked from the room. When he reached the front door, he twisted the brass Yale knob and swung the door open. The whine stopped straight away. The corridor was empty, except for an unexplained fridge that stood unwanted outside number 145. 6 doors lined the passageway, including his own, all closed. There was something unfriendly about them now. The fridge was the only evidence that there had ever been inhabitants. Jed felt an affinity with it and gave it a playful nod. Things had become a little strained of late. Later, over a dinner of fish fingers and chips, followed by Viennetta, he watched a documentary about space. A stray thought crossed his mind. In a couple of months, the council would bring dynamite. Until then, the whole building was his domain. It was dizzying. The thought of all that empty space around him, earmarked for destruction. Who would know if he was to take a look around? Who would care if he went into the empty flats, even broke in? There might be all sorts of things left behind, like the fridge outside, that he could use until, well, just until. And then, after all those months were up, he'd think about that later. He glanced around the room at his mother's things that he planned to pack and take somewhere this week, a charity shop perhaps. Now it seemed like an unnecessary effort. If he moved them somewhere else in the building, somewhere nice and respectful but out of sight, that would be enough, wouldn't it? The man on the TV continued to explain how scientists still didn't know how big space was. The man said, "we" a lot. We don't know how big space is, as though there were a group of friends who discussed it often to no conclusive end. The idea was comforting. There's so much out there that we still don't know, the presenter said. Jed stared at the screen, transfixed. Then in the advert break, he helped himself to another bowl of ice cream, without anyone to tell him he'd had enough. When he closed his eyes that night, he heard the wind touch F sharp again, through the door frame. He imagined the building supporting him from beneath. The air that had been circulated by all 300 tenants, now his alone. It seemed fresh, clean. After years of his mother taking up all the air in the room, he felt as though he could finally breathe. While Jed slept, with the warm air breathing through constant vents, the building settled. In Mrs. Percy's old flat at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor, the latch on the window bumped open when the glass rattled in the wind. The window opened a few inches as though pushed by invisible hands. The cool air swung her old wardrobe door open, and it sounded a staccato low D as its hinges stuck on the way open. A mink jacket inside, left behind because of moth-eaten holes, swung back and forth on the pole and squeaked out a G on each backswing. The hollow curtain pole in Janet Good's living room, teetering on its fastenings since she pulled the curtains down in haste, fell from one side 3 feet down onto the windowsill, the other still attached to the wall. It struck a drummer's paradiddle when it hit the sill that resonated off pictureless walls. Enormous saucepans, all the way from Lebanon in Mr. and Mrs. Haddad's kitchen, forgotten above the kitchen cabinets, ting-tonged together in the wind that came through an open window. A coffee table, propped on its end next to the living room door at Mick the dustman's flat, lost its battle with gravity and fell heavily against the door frame with a muted tympanic thunk. All night long, the wind continued to blow, and Greenwood Heights breathed it in.